I'd like to welcome James Ora, North Carolina Raleigh writer. Welcome. Thank you for taking your time to be with me here today.
Happy to be here.
Thanks so much. Well, we're here to talk about your life, your career, and your book, Hurricane Code, which I read a couple of years ago. I read it as an ebook on Kindle. So it's out there, everybody. Go get a copy of it. Check it out. I thought it was a really intelligent and important book to read. And I want to actually reread it in paperback now. So I'm going to get myself another copy of it and revisit it. A lot of great things that go on in that. And I was inspired enough. There we have it. Beautiful. I don't have my copy yet, so it's actually been ordered. So the Hurricane Code is a climate change novel. So and there's the kind of a new genre of fiction out there with that because of it's such an issue. And there's a lot of other science issues that come up in the novel. So I thought it was really an interesting and timely book. So I brought it into my course, one of my course sections at NC State this past semester, read the book, and they really enjoyed it. They're really receptive to it. And I have a lot of, they did some of my homework for me, and I have a stack of questions from them. So I'm going to use their questions as well as some of my own. Would you like to start and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Grew up on a farm in northern Missouri. Went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism. Went into the broadcast side of the business. And I was on the air for several years. But first I was drafted, was in the Vietnam draft. Did 2 years at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And after that, went into broadcast news. I was a TV news anchor in Quincy, Illinois for years, and then shifted to the management side, became a news director. And so I did that in Quincy for a while, and then I moved to Jacksonville, Florida. In the TV news business, you hop from market to market. In other words, you look to move to a bigger market. When I got to Raleigh, I was at WRAL TV, and my family and I at that time decided Raleigh was about big enough for us. We were happy here. So this is where I've stayed since 1981.
Nice, nice.
I got interested in weather because part of my job was management of the WRAL Weather Center, which we were just starting up in 1981. And the, the slogan for it was "Wired for Weather" on WRAL. And the meteorologists who we hired at that time were excited about being part of a station that emphasized weather coverage, and it really took off from there. I think the Weather Center has been quite successful on the station. Um, I went into the corporate side of the business later in the 1980s, and actually wound up my career as a director of corporate human resources for Capital Broadcasting, which involved recruiting, hiring, firing, all of that, all of the management training, the whole gamut. And so I've been out of the business a number of years, many years actually, and I retired. Um, and during that time, I took a creative writing course at Wake Tech. Uh, I'd moved from being a manager of a large newsroom to being in a corporate position with basically one secretary and an office, and it was relatively calm and quiet. So, and I had a little free time, and so I took a creative writing course at Wake Tech, and that got me hooked on writing fiction. So I wrote the book When Saigon Surrendered. Uh, I actually started that in 1990, and then I put it away because I got busy. I finally got really busy at work. And after I retired one day, I reached into a desk drawer and I pulled it out and I said, I think I've got more of a story to tell here. And so I finished writing the book, and that was the first book. That came out in 2015.
Wow, what a long road to that first book. That's
Yeah.
great.
So it sat and incubated for a while.
Same with mine. It took 18 years to get to my first novel.
The
So
Punk and the Professor.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great
Long,
book,
long,
by the
long
way.
road. Oh, thank you.
Um, so that's where we are today. So I'm currently writing a fourth novel now. It's also set in Kentucky, and I'm in a couple of writing groups. Really recommend writing groups. A place where you can bring your work, let other people critique it, critique the work of others, and do it in a generally non-judgmental, safe environment. I think that's really helpful, and I really recommend that. I use make definitely I use beta editors. By that I mean beta readers. Um, there's a guy I used to work with in Florida, Tom Sweeney, who's an excellent beta reader, and he's also from Kentucky, so that helps. Um, and in the hurricane code, I actually used him and my wife Victoria. She is also a beta reader. She's a great beta reader. Uh, Rick Joyce in Minnesota, and a lady named Rose up in British Columbia. So from that, I got perspective pretty much across the North American continent on the hurricane
Diverse.
code,
Yes.
right? Which helped me with the big picture.
Nice. How different is the creative writing pursuits than your background in journalism? Was that a nice foundation for what you were going to do with the
Oh,
fiction?
definitely, definitely. I mean, the journalism school training was quite valuable for me. I mean, I wrote newscasts for about 10 years,
Wow.
and under a time constraint. By that, I mean I would come in at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and write the 6 o'clock news, and then
Quick, right?
anchor it, and then take a break, and then write the 10 o'clock news, and then go home like at midnight. So that's the life of a small town news anchor. You write your own news. Sometimes you edit your own film.
Wow.
Um, it's a challenge, but it was also a good foundation for what was to come. It gave me an appreciation for not only the written word, but also the visual aspects of a story. And I try to incorporate that into my books as well. I try to write visually um, to stimulate the imagination and help the reader kind of establish a sense of place.
Place is very important in the hurricane code. It's
Yes, it is.
prominent theme, I think that.
It is. And one of the reasons I chose the Midwest and the upper Midwest for it is, of course, I'm from that part of the country originally, but there are a lot of folks who live in the northern Midwest who think that climate change is not going to affect them much. And one of the factors, of course, they don't think about is the possibility of millions of migrant immigrants moving north. So, the hurricanes code starts out with Minneapolis, Minnesota, crowded with refugees from Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, fleeing north from the hurricanes.
That was a common question that came up in the course that just read the book was why did you choose the middle of the country when a lot of climate change is usually we talk about it in terms of coastal cities that are affected and the South where it's getting hotter. We don't normally hear about the middle. So that was a
Right. Right. Well, I believe that the Midwest, the upper Midwest especially, will be hugely affected, both in climate and in population. As a matter of fact, there are some governmental agencies up there now who are actually starting to talk about what will we do with if we have hordes of people coming from the South. How will we handle that? Are we structured? to deal with that kind of an influx of people. And that's certainly something that's affected Europe. I mean,
Yes.
there's a huge migration of immigrants from northern Africa, North Africa, the Sudan, the Sahara region, and other parts of Africa that have been really hard hit by heat and drought. And if they can't live off their farms, they're going to do something. And a lot of them decide to move north.
It's about survival. Yeah.
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 And I don't see it stopping. I mean, uh, once humans decide to save themselves and their family, they'll go to a lot of they'll take extreme measures to do that.
Sure.
Can't blame them.
No, no, you can't. Yeah. So Florida has a grim future outlook in your book. So it's
It does, and I lived in Florida for a couple of years, Jacksonville, Florida, and the state is low. It's low and
it's
it's flat,
very low. Yeah, very flat.
and it certainly would be vulnerable. Also, the Gulf Coast. Um, I mentioned in the book that by 2099, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is in 30 feet of water, seawater. New Orleans is long gone. Uh, and of course, we don't know what the world will be like in 2099, so that's speculative. I call it speculative fiction. Um, but I look at a lot of factors that go into climate, and then I extrapolate what might happen. And if the governments of the world don't get their acts together and move, and I hate to say it, but so far there's been a lot of inertia. um, it's possible we could see something like that in 2099.
So your interest in weather is what got this started, right? At what point did you realize that what was it originally a climate change story as you started writing that in the earliest stages?
Uh, my inspiration for this came from Hurricane Diana. Hurricane Diana hit the North Carolina coast in 1984, and it basically reached Wilmington, and it just sat there in the ocean and churned. And I talked a guy in Philadelphia into driving his satellite truck to Wilmington ahead of the storm so that we could do live shots from Wilmington on the news. And that was a huge undertaking. We had news crews in Wilmington, and the storm just sat there and churned. It didn't come inland. So things dragged out. Finally, it weakened and it did come in. And so we had basically a marathon project going of news crews doing live shots, doing reports for other cities, other TV stations participated. And the next year, that project by our newsroom won the national award from our TNDA for continuing coverage of a news story. And I've often looked back on that and thought about the whole phenomenon of hurricanes, how they come about. And back then, the science wasn't quite as advanced, and our meteorologists were guessing a little bit, and they were making educated guesses, and they were good guesses. But for example, nobody anticipated that the hurricane would just sit there and spin for a couple of days before it came in. And then, of course, years later, Hurricane Fran um, came right across my house in Cary, North Carolina at the time at midnight. And it was a category, by the time it got here, it was a category 1, borderline category 2. And we woke up the next day and there was no electricity for a week.
Week. Wow.
So I've had a lot of inspiration from hurricanes to brewing in my mind to get this story going.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. It's and the science and the talk, the discussion of all these the crisis is growing. What has happened since you finished and published the book? Are there any changes that you think about now? Would you still have made it 2099? Would you what is there anything that kind of updated?
I think 2099 is still a good target date for it. I might have worked in a few things that they were more aware of now. I might have emphasized um, the climate feedback loop a little bit more. You know, the feedback loop is a phenomenon that um, the heat feeds on itself. And so, you know, the warmer the ocean gets, uh, it affects things, and it affects. There are, we don't know how many there are, but there are thousands of methane hydrates on the floor of the ocean that are frozen. And if those methane hydrates melt, it'll just speed everything up. Now, in the book, I touch on that, but I don't, probably would emphasize it more now.
Really? Okay.
Um, Other than that, I think it all pretty much holds. What I don't like to see is I actually to see things progressing a little faster than I project in the book. You know, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope they slow down again. But I check the ocean temperature every day, and you know, down in the Caribbean, it's already pretty warm, and all a hurricane needs is 80 degrees and low pressure. And you can get a hurricane out of that mix if the wind conditions are right. So Colorado State meteorologists have already predicted a more active than normal hurricane season based on the ocean temperature and the fact that La Nina and El Nino are probably going to switch places, and that you know that could also affect the atmospheric conditions in the ocean, and we're not totally sure how that works, but it definitely has an effect on hurricanes. So, other than that, I don't think I would change anything. Maybe I might emphasize the tigers a little more.
There were a couple of students who did they asked about why 2099, and their concern was this would happen sooner, where they were actually thinking, yeah, we see a lot within decades. We're going to see a lot more damage.
Well, certainly parts of it will happen sooner, but in the book, of course, it evolves. I mean, by by 2040, remember there was a uh, an attack on the world's first world countries by impact bombs in the atmosphere. Um, and, you know, that shut down electricity for a large part of the world. And that actually slowed things down a little bit because, you know, we stopped burning fossil fuels for a while. Um, and also disrupted communications and also reduced the population greatly, which was one of the goals of the AIs who are running the government now, and that is gradual population reduction. So to you know to make the Earth more livable for us and other species. So 2099 is a pretty good target group. It also happens to be a date when both of my grandkids might still be alive.
Ah, yeah. So that's another. That's yeah. That's true. When you think about that, when you do the math, right?
So I'm curious what else some of your students had to say in reaction to the book.
Yeah, that you know, that very good response. They were very receptive to it. Um, the some wanted to know about the characters and the names and kind of where they came from. There was Dr. Branson, and he was somebody who came up, and um, yeah, that's one place we could one thing we could talk about is there anything with the names of those characters or where they come from or
Well, Roxanne and her dad, Dr. Branson, that name Branson also happens to be the name of a billionaire who's alive now,
Yes, yeah, Richard.
who, ran a huge media operation, and now he shoots rockets into the air.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a possible tie there, but who knows? Maybe it's coincidence.
One,
James
one question.
Cameron,
Oh yeah, go
James
ahead.
Cameron is that name is somewhat similar to the movie director Cameron, uh, who's done some big blockbuster films, but
Yes.
I'm not saying he's any relation. Uh, the Sioux Indian, Zeb Wolf, is actually related to some Indians that my father knew. My father was a homesteader in North Dakota in the early 1900s. Um, he was up in years when I came along, and he was friends with a number of Sioux Indians, and a number of them were named Wolf.
Wow. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. How about Searcher and the task to protect Roxanne? How did that develop into emotional attachment, and what can you say about those?
Well, Searcher was one of my favorite characters, which is kind of interesting since it was an AI. Um, when I started writing this book, AI was in the background, but it's nothing like it is today. I mean, now it's AI all
Oh,
over the
it's all you
place.
hear about. Yeah, it's
And, but back then it was just kind of a twinkle in a few computer programmers' eyes. Um, and I decided to extrapolate computer science into quantum computers. Or we're also talking about quantum computers now, and to say what would happen if use the quantum computers could generate intelligent entities that were sentient. And my definition of sentient is a little different than some. My definition of sentient is knowing where you came from and knowing when you will die. So that level of awareness from a machine. Um, so the character Searcher grows throughout the story. I mean, becomes more mature, more intelligent. He's almost like a kid growing up. And by the end of the book, he's a pretty powerful entity. So powerful that he can manipulate some things. And if I write a sequel, I'll probably have a descendant of Searcher in it.
that was a question. Will there be a sequel?
There very well might be. It'll probably be in northern Canada,
Wow.
and probably about 400 years from now.
Oh, that's a stretch. Wow, what a stretch in time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really look ahead. Hmm. Great. That was a common question. A lot of folks saw that when they read it. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, it's in the back of my mind.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. What made you choose the point of view for the book? Some people wondered about that for third person versus first person.
That's a really good subject. I've experimented with that some. My Kentucky mysteries, the When Saigon Surrendered and the Cumberland Killers, are all both told in first person.
Oh, okay. So the other
And
two
that
books.
character is Russell Ray Teague. And so from those stories, it's all in his voice, his point of view. And when it came time to write this one, I thought, it might be fun to it's hard to get the big picture when you're writing first person. So as an experiment, I started writing the big picture and focusing on Gabe Cameron as he sits and watches the hurricane come into Minnesota, the compound where he's living. and it just developed from there. Um, it allowed me to switch, locations. Um, I could go from Minnesota to southern Missouri. I could go from Minnesota to Regina, Canada. Um, and so that's why I did it. It gave me more flexibility and a wider point of view.
Absolutely understood. Yeah, first person would have been limited with that. So
The first person could have been very effective through the eyes of a single person who's dealing with hurricanes and migration and all of that. But I decided to choose the wider point of view for this one. Now,
sure.
the novel I'm working on is an experiment in progress, but it involves both first person and third person.
Both. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's experimental. Nice.
So it's kind of, so far my writing group likes it.
Okay. Is
Yeah.
this another murder mystery?
It is
Okay.
set in Louisville, Kentucky in 1990.
Wow. How far along are you with it?
I'm about halfway done.
Wow. Wow. Exciting.
Goal is to have it out by 20 sometime in 2025.
Okay. Nice, nice. That's great. Great to look forward to that. How about somebody asked about the pets and other animals that were not eaten, the ones that weren't, what happened to them? Did they just, we assume that they die or
Well, they weren't mentioned much, were they?
yeah.
So they don't have much of a presence.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, people certainly might have had dogs that teamed along with them, but in some cultures, dogs are good eating. So
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
uh, if you're dealing with a nearly apocalyptic situation, the pets might not fare so well.
Yeah, yeah, really. Yeah, that's a good point. What about somebody was curious about smartphones and internet and the exclusion, the absence of that, right?
Right. Well, those went down with the EMP explosions, and that's a real thing, by the way. If an EMP
If that
explosion
happened, right, we would be disconnected.
in the atmosphere, if there's an EMP explosion at the right level of the atmosphere, it would basically take out anything with a transistor in it.
Wow, really?
So yeah, that explains that. That all of that went away when the EMP explosions went off. And there's a hidden agenda in the story, and that is, why do the AIs do some of the things they do? We don't know, but perhaps it's to help reduce the human population.
Hmm.
Remember, the stated goal of the AIs is to bring the population down to what it was in the year 1800, and that's 1 billion people
One
around the
billion.
globe.
Wow, yeah, that's a big drop then.
So that's a big drop. And AIs are not, we assume that Asimov's law of robotics applies, and that is that robots are not allowed to hurt people. But um, there might be some exceptions to that rule. The Hunter, for example, the Hunter robot was certainly an exception to the rule.
Are you personally worried about artificial intelligence?
I think it's a huge opportunity for people to make a great leap forward. Um, but will we? I don't know. Stay tuned. It's they're but they're doing some amazing things with it. They're also doing some terrible things with it. Uh, Amazon is now cluttered with rip-offs from AI written stories, and I really think corporations need to be doing more about that. Um, there needs to be a code of ethics, and we're really just starting to think about that. I think
Yeah, I've
we're
read a lot about literary presses getting submissions and contests getting submissions written by AI. And the, we're we're finding out. It's no secret. It's no we I think that the editors realized quickly that this was not written by a human. So, but at what point does it get better? And then at what point you also have
Right.
an issue with drawings and music and
At some point, there will probably be a literary category for artificial intelligence, and they can compete against one another. Hey, maybe Searcher could write a book, you know?
yeah, yeah, that's it. Oh, wow. Well, yeah, and there's a lot of people that blow it, they blow it up. Either way, it's the end of the world or it's the savior of everything, and I'm not quite sure which way we go as a society.
I'm not either. I mean, it could be there's some terrific advancements that it could make. It could also be used for harm.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously, like I mean, in your book, The Hurricane Code, we have AI, we have war, political disaster, right? It's is there what's the sign of hope in this book? Is there anything that
You know, I think it is a hopeful book in some ways, and that is that life goes on, and the fact that that Gabe Cameron and his mother and the group of Mennonites from Kansas made it to Fairbanks, Alaska, um, and had children, and live on into the future. I think that's a hopeful sign. It's just that the human race prevails, but uh, in very different circumstances.
yeah.
Not necessarily in the current modern capitalistic society in which we live.
Things have to change in many
There may
ways.
be a time when, when growth at all costs is no longer a priority. Maybe survival at all costs instead.
Well, I think the students that read this really, I think that it was an enjoyable read. You've gotten a lot of great reviews online as well for this book. I think it's an important book, and I hope more people will read it. And I think a sequel would be great to do that. Would you ever make this into a film? Have you ever thought about that? If you were
Yeah,
off,
I think it is. I think it would be highly filmable.
yeah, I think it has the cinematic qualities already built right into it.
I think it does. Yeah. I've thought about it. I haven't talked to anyone about it yet, but I may down the road.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. It's a very timely book. It's got a lot of great, big important topics in it. So, well, what you have some favorite authors that you want to leave us with? Other favorite authors that maybe inspired you?
Well, my original favorite author was Mark Twain,
Wow. Okay.
and Mark Twain lived in Hannibal, Missouri, which is about 60 miles from where I grew up. And so one day in high school, my English teacher asked us if you were going to have a pen name, what pen name would you choose? And off the top of my head, I chose James Ara. So when it came time to start writing fiction, I thought, I think I'll just honor Mrs. Adams and I'll use that pen name. 60 years later, James Ara.
Wow. Amazing story.
Yeah. Um, I like, there are a ton of great authors. Margaret Atwood, I like a lot. Um, and a lot of the classic sci-fi authors, Asimov, um, Philip K. Dick. And then the mystery authors are just, oh, there are too many to there. Mysteries is such a huge genre.
Oh, it is.
There's
Yeah.
a wide field of those. John Sanford, I think, is a very good thriller author, an author of thriller mysteries. Um, the guy who wrote the Navajo mysteries in New Mexico, I can't think of his name right off the tip of my tongue, but he's I would recommend him. There was a TV series based on some of his books, and basically it's about a Navajo Indian sheriff, uh, and it's all weaves Navajo culture into the stories, and it's very good.
Nice.
But I mean, the main thing I would ask, encourage people to do is read. Read when you have time. Read when you don't have time. It's uh, it's a great way to broaden your horizons, improve your empathy, um, and keep getting educated as well.
That's a fine message to close on. So